everybody. Welcome to Wednesday Workshop with Sew in Common, home of Build A Quilt, where we create beautiful patchwork with our home embroidery machine. And this Wednesday workshop is part 2 of our panels and the Build A Quilt system. Let me fix my camera a little bit. There we go. Somehow it was a little crooked. Didn't want you to have to look that way. Anyway, I'm Diana, everybody. So glad you could be with me today. Like I said, this is part 2 of our panels and the Build A Quilt system. Do I have? Yes. So let me fix this for a second. And then there we go. Now it says part 2. It did still say part 1. I forgot to fix it. Anyway, we are doing that today. Now, last week we talked about panel prep, right? We talked about how to prep our panels so that we got accurate and true measurements, and then we could go ahead and start working on our designs. Well, today we're going to talk a little bit about how you can go about choosing which of the segments to use from the Build A Quilt Basics 1 or 2 sets, depending on the quilt, because I believe the panel is going to instruct you on the best way to choose these. And then the last panel we're going to look at will be the panel from last week, that Star Wars one, that for the quilt that I'm making as a gift. And we're going to talk about fabrics for that panel today as well. So let's go ahead and flip over to my other camera. There we go. Now you can see this better and me a little bit less. Okay, so I chose this gorgeous gnome panel. It says timber. I think that's cute. Now, this particular panel is a cotton flannel, okay? And with cotton flannel, it's got that warm yumminess to it. It's got a little more heft to it. And this particular panel, because of the way it's laid out, let me bring, let's see, can you see? You can't. Let me bring it up a little bit. See how the bottom of it is with the plaid and the beautiful little trees and all? For me, this says good old-fashioned patchwork. This tells me I want to add blocks around it, patchwork blocks, stars, maybe a couple of tree blocks around it, to make it really that warm and cozy look. Could you do your blocks in cotton flannel with the Build A Quilt method? Absolutely you can. You can piece the flannel and have a total flannel top if you want, or you could just leave the center flannel. That's entirely up to you. So let's come back now to our main camera. My hair really fell out this morning. Sorry about that. I look a little bit straggly. Okay, so I have in the Build A Quilt Basics 1, you know, we have the square, the half square triangle, and the quarter square triangle in 4 sizes. And then in 2, we have the flying geese unit and the split rail and the diamond in a square. So I'm thinking about this, and could I make the idea of trees with any of these blocks? I might be able to with my half square triangle. That could be like the top of a tree. Then the second block, I could use half square triangles on each side and a square in the center to kind of make that tree form. So you could patch together a tree block just by using the square and the half square triangle. And now I know some of you are thinking, oh, how would I do that? Well, that's where grid paper comes in, right? Good old-fashioned paper. You just kind of have to figure it out. So I am going to just trace out my idea here real quick and see if we can come up with something. Let's see. So we would want that there and that there. I don't usually do this on the fly, but you know, I am today. So you could start out something like that, or you might want to make these 3 just blocks and then put a half square triangle on each side. Let's see what that would look like. A half square triangle, split, split, and a block and a block. This might be better. There we go. square triangle, half square triangle. All right, so here we go. This is better. Real rough draft here. So I would do a solid block, a half square triangle, and a solid block. Then I would do a half square triangle, solid block, half square triangle. And then I'd keep building, and you can see that with my half square triangles, I'm making a tree shape. And because you have segments from 2 to 5 inches, you can figure out what segment size you need to get a block that you need. And that is all part of translation from a pattern typically to the Build a Quilt system. And we are going to have a series coming up about translating quilt patterns into the Build a Quilt system. How do I figure out which block, that kind of thing. But what I want you to know, that with something like this particular panel, you can really add lots of beautiful patchwork around it to make it, give it that warm and country-ish, soft, kind of quilty look that we love, that kind of old-time quilt that we love. That works perfect for it. However, let's flip back over to our other camera, and let's flip this panel up and over. And look at this one. This is a Christmas one. This is a tree panel. Boy, it needs to be pressed, doesn't it? But this is a tree panel. And isn't it gorgeous? And this definitely, to me, says a little bit more elegant, I guess, because there's the silver and the golds, and it looks like a flocked tree under there. Flocking is when you put that fake snow on your tree. Really beautiful. And here at the bottom, there are some beautiful stars, like lacy snowflake stars. These could be cut out and used as cornerstones in, say, your, well, let's flip back over now to my other piece. So with these snowflakes, you could use your diamond in a square, and you could use these as the centers of your diamond in a square. So you would fussy cut those to fit into the diamond in a square, and then maybe make those into cornerstones, because let's see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 5 of them. So you could do the 2 silver and the 2 gold, and then you just have 1 left over. And you could put those in as cornerstones, still giving it that elegant look. And then maybe just for borders, because with something like this, this screams to me wall hanging. I'm not going to cuddle up under a quilt that looks this pretty, right? It screams wall hanging. So it doesn't need a lot of fancy piecework in it to make it continue to look elegant, and just have a lovely piece to hang on the wall. But I would definitely think about that diamond in a square for some corner squares. And then for your borders, you could do just a half square triangle pieced border, or you could do quarter square triangle pieced border, 2 gold, 2 silver, all the way around it. Still some lovely piecing that shows, hey, I've done some work on this panel. I've made it more than it was at the beginning, but it doesn't add a real homespun look to it like the one with our gnomes would, right? We're keeping it more simple, more generalized, because we still want to keep the overall elegant look. Sorry, I've got something. It's part of my microphone. We still have an elegant look to it, but we've added that extra something to it that only patchwork can do, right? So that could certainly be what you would do for a panel like this. And I've told you that for these 2 panels to say that when you're using your panel, you want to look and see what it says to you. Does it say fancy and elegant? Does it say homespun? What if it was a children's panel and it had balloons and all things like that? Then you might want to do things like a split rail in multiples all the way around in all the colors in the quilt and make it really come alive. And then maybe add some pieced blocks around it, because with a children's quilt, a child's quilt, you can really go to town with your piecing. You can really make it fun and exciting, something that a child will love now and will love as an adult as well. Trust me, I know. So you can really have fun with that if it's a child's quilt. But no matter what your panel, let that panel influence you on what you're going to do with it. So now let's flip over to our panel that I'm using. So here is, I've kind of got it folded here on the edges so I could get it on this design wall. So here is the Star Wars panel. And you know, out on the edges, it looks like this from last week, right? So let me flip my camera over again. You can see it a little better. So what would I want to do with this? Does this scream additional patchwork to you? Doesn't really scream it to me. Very sci-fi, right? Very sci-fi, because that's it is. It's a sci-fi film. Very futuristic. So that futuristic kind of says to me simplicity, maybe. Not a lot of hoopla, not a lot of swirls, definitely not a lot of swirly, curly-Q, flowery kinds of things, but more simple, more basic. So for this, once again, I think you could do cornerstones. Remember, I'm just making this a little bit bigger. I'm just turning this into a throw for her to put on her lap. So this could definitely be something that you could do cornerstones on it. Let's flip back over now. You could do the cornerstones with the diamond in a square. And I will be using the diamond in a square. And I believe I'm using a 4x4 because with my measurements, it came out to that. And we're going to talk about that more in another section. And then all the way around it, I want to do a border like a piano border where they're rectangular and they look like piano keys, right? My split rail, I can do that. Now I'm going to have to do a lot of them because the split rail is only 2 pieces, but that's okay. That's okay. And I'm going to keep my colors to solids. I have a batik as well, but a batik that kind of can read as a solid, can be fill in for that. So I'm going to keep my border for this very, very simple because I don't want it to be fancy and I don't want it to have that homespun look like I would with my gnomes that I showed you. I want to keep the feel of this in that kind of a sci-fi scenario, but I still want it to say, wow, there was some work put on this. It's not just this pretty panel. There's some other, wow, this is all pieced together. So I can do that. And so that's what I've chosen. So both of these that I'm going to use for this quilt at this point is going to come from Basic Block Set 2, the diamond in a square, and the split rail. Okay. So now let's talk for a moment. So just remember, when you're working with your panel, think about what that panel says. Fun and flirty, floral, children, whimsical, whimsical holiday, sci-fi, very basic, very modern, futuristic looking. Think about those things when you go to start looking at how you want to add either just border or if you want to make full-size blocks and really expand your quilt. If I really expanded this quilt out for this panel, I think if I did pieced blocks, I would do very simplistic pieced blocks with my half square triangle and still keep them two-tone and very simple. Almost like this would be sitting on a background of just some generalized piecing in a couple of colors. I'd still keep it simple so it would still have that kind of futuristic science fiction kind of look to it. All right, let's talk about fabric now. So this panel, I will tell you, is confusing in color because when you see this, it looks blue. And then if you look at it from another direction, it looks purple. Look at that blue block right behind me, right there, the St. George's Cross. That's blue. This is not blue compared to that. This is purple, right? But when you put it up next to purple, it's not purple, it's blue. So it's a very kind of unforgiving color. So what I had to do was take this to the fabric store and lay it out on their cutting table. They were nice enough to let me do that. And I had to start bringing up bolts of fabric and kind of playing with them in order to get it to a point where I found things that I liked. So I've shown you this fabric before. This will probably end up being on the back of the quilt, or it's going to be, I'm going to do a 3-color split rail. So like 2 colors in one split rail, 2 different colors in another split rail. So one color would be a repeat. The other 2 would just be every other block. Maybe, because I really like this. There's lots of browns down in here, right? Lots of brown, sandy colors. When you get in here, you're getting into, this looks black. It isn't. It's a really deep, it's like your deepest, most high level of cocoa chocolate that you can find, like the 72% dark chocolate. That's kind of what that color is, or the 80s. That's kind of what that color is. And believe it or not, up in here where this all looks blue, it's really not. These are more purples and blues. They're very funny tones, and they really kind of blend into grays and whites, but that gray is really more purple than gray. It's so funny how these colors come together. But this looks really good with this. It's got a little bit of pattern to it. See? This reminds me of a ground. I'm going to tell you something geeky now. This reminds me of a ground penetrating radar projection. When you see ground penetrating radar, that's when they put radar into the ground to kind of see like where seams of metals are for mining, or is there like caves, you know, and a cave or something that they're trying to find, like what happened, or if they're trying to like to figure out what part of a mine may have collapsed. Ground penetrating radar shows them all kinds of things. In archaeology, they use that, and it shows them where ancient civilizations are underground that have been grown up over. That's why we're finding so many new interesting things about what this planet was like thousands of years ago, because ground penetrating radar is letting us do that. Our history literally gets covered up over time. And this is what it looks like, except it would be in grays and black. That really reminds me. And then if there was something that they found, you would see like an outline kind of a thing or something in it, and you'd go, oh, that's not supposed to be there, that's something different. And then they can, you know, check that out, figure out what that is. But that's what that reminds me of. And it's a great fabric, by the way. But when I went and I was showing, I was playing with all these fabrics, one that I found that really goes well is this batik, because it's got purples and blues. You can see, let's bring this in. You can see that really kind of blends with that. And trust me when I tell you, it's the only stinking fabric I could find that even came close. And what I realized, because I was planning to use a solid, but what I realized with this, and so you have to keep that in mind when you're looking for fabrics for your panel, is you might be thinking you're going to use a solid, or you're going to use a really wild print. But what you might find out is that you need something that's really more blendable, which would be in a print, some tiny ditzy little print, those prints that read as solid. They're not all one color though, so they can blend better because they usually have a couple of colors in them. Or a batik. I don't always use batik with straight solid quilting fabric, but this is a nicely made batik. And it's a true batik. It's the same on the front and the back. If you ever get a batik that looks beautiful on the front and the back looks white, that's a printed batik. It's not a true batik, but you can get that look on the front of your piece anyway. But this is a true batik, and it really goes well. And when you start putting it up in here, it really looks good. Now this light's making this look a little bit lighter than it is, but this is going to work well. And so the other color that I got to go with it is this color. This reminds me of a yummy milk chocolate, hot chocolate drink, hot cocoa. But when I put this up here, this is really where these colors are coming from. They're all blending into one another. Again, this light makes it look lighter, but these colors in here are just right in that same area, that same family of colors. So these are going to be then my piano border, my piano keys, my split rail keys. And I might do it this, and this. I don't know. I just don't know. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make a couple of samples of a 2-block version and a 3-block version and compare and see. And I'll show you that as well. Then I'm going to do cornerstones. I want to add to this because it is what it is in one of these, right? It's Star Wars. That is what it is. You can't make this into something different, right? So I found this other fabric with the baby Yoda on it, which we call baby yo-yo in our family. Because somebody couldn't say Yoda, but they say yo-yo. So this is baby yo-yo. And I found this fabric. Now let's look at this. There's nothing about that matches, right? And you're saying, oh, Diana, why would you want to use that? Well, remember in my cornerstones, it's a great way to use fabric as fussy cuts. So what I thought I'd do is 2 of the little baby Yodas in his little carrier, and 2 of them as by himself in the corners inside my diamond in a square. Okay. And because they're so little, they're not going to change the look of this. The color is not going to make a difference. In fact, mostly what you're going to see, there is a little bit of brown in here. That's good. And then you're going to have that tiny wee bit of green from the baby Yoda, but it's not going to make a difference. But it's going to add just a slight bit of whimsy. Just the tiniest bit, like just a dash. You know how when they say you take a pinch of salt and you add it and it makes everything better? I think by adding the baby Yodas in the corner squares, it's going to make this much better. It's going to take it from the serious just a little bit lighter. It's still going to be the serious that it is, the futuristic, all that, but it's just going to be a little bit lighter. And I was looking actually for a fabric that I could fussy cut this little robot guy of hers. He's B something. I don't remember what he's called, but and this little guy, in reality, Dave and I rewatched this movie the other night so I could know more about what's going on here. And he's orange and white. So technically, the wee bit of orange in here could help with that too. But Yoda, this is after the original film, so I think Yoda has already disappeared into the Force. I don't know what they say about that. But I think he's still kind of like everybody still knows who Yoda was and all of that, Master Yoda by that time. But here he is as a baby Yoda. So I just thought it would be fun. And I know that the young woman who likes this series loves this character. So although it might not be 100% in this particular movie, it is something that she will enjoy. And that's another thing you always want to keep in mind when you're creating a quilt for someone, especially if you're doing something with a licensed panel fabric, is do they like the whole series? Is this just a movie? Is this just a whimsical thing, like a joke at work? But she actually loves all of these films. So, and I know she loves this character. So adding just that tiny, wee, small touch is going to make a huge difference for her. Might not be something I would do for me, but for her, it's going to make a huge difference, and she's going to love it all the more. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do with Baby Yoda. And what I could do with the Baby Yoda is, instead of doing this in the split rails in the keys, I could do this as the corners of my diamond in a square. That might work out too. So I'm going to do, I got enough. I only bought a half a yard of this because these are so small that, you know, even if I make a couple as tryouts, it's going to be good. It's going to be just fine. Alrighty. So fabric, think about your panel. Think about what your panel is telling you before you pick your fabric and before you pick what segments you're going to use. Because first you really do need to decide, are you just going to add some borders? Like I could add 2 or 3 patchwork borders on here. That could be kind of an interesting idea. Or you can add full blocks on. But really let your panel speak to you. Okay, the video at the end is going to be about calculating what size of the Build a Quilt segments to use for this week. So this week, think about your panel. What does it say to you? To help you figure out what segments you want to use and how you want to do your piece around the panel. We'll talk about measuring in all 4 of those segments so you know what size you want to use, and then thinking about your fabric. Next week, we'll go into much more detail with the pieced segments. I'll have my prototypes of segments created so that we can look at them and talk about what they might be. We'll talk about how I'm going to put these together. All of that will be coming in next week. Okay. So for now, everybody, thank you so much for being with me today on Wednesday Workshop Panels and Build a Quilt Part 2. Again, I'm Diana. I'm the founder of Build a Quilt and the owner here of Sew in Common. If you have not yet, please just go right now, just take your little mouse or your little finger over and click that subscribe button. Would you please? Because we'd love to have you as part of the Build a Quilt family. And please like and share the videos. I've gotten a lot of comments so far about doing this series. People were interested in this, so that's great. And I love doing it for you. So please like and share the videos. And if you need to get the Build a Quilt systems, of course, you can find System 1 and System 2, Basics Set 1 and Set 2, over at our website, sewincommon.com. And of course, last week's video, I will link at the end here so that you can watch that if you're trying to catch up and haven't seen it yet. So until next time, everybody, catch the little video at the end. And as always, sew life beautiful. Bye for now. All right, everybody, here we are at the work table, and I wanted just to finish going over kind of the calculation process for your quilts. So in the earlier part of our video, we talked about specifically how to go about choosing which segments you wanted to use from the Basics 1 or 2 set, whether you wanted to do a border or whether you wanted to do full blocks. And for this particular quilt that I'm doing for this panel, last week we also talked about prepping it, and that was trimming it down, making the measurements and that sort of thing. And I actually have to press mine again because it has gotten wrinkled up from being carried off to a fabric store and from being hung and then taken down. And so I have to repress mine. But what I've chosen was my split rail segment and my diamond in a square. The diamond in a square will be for cornerstones, and the split rail is going to make that kind of a piano key border. Now, what you need to do is figure out how many of these do you need to make, right? Do I need to make 1,000 of them? Do I need to make 8 of them? Do I need to make 20 of them? What do I need to do? So when I measured this originally, the width and the height were not divisible evenly by any number. So, well, whoops, that's a problem. So I knew I had about 4 or 5 inches in this fabric part of the panel. So I kept kind of reducing it a little bit, a little bit, a little bit on the calculator to figure out what numbers would get me to them both, width and height, being divisible by the same number. And what I ended up with was a width of 32 and a height of 40. And so I had to end up trimming off about an inch and a half or so on all 4 sides. And that's okay. That's perfectly all right. It still gives me some of this cool border around the print, and it'll still work nicely with the fabrics. And remember, we just looked at the fabrics a few minutes ago, and they're going to be this and this and this. And I've decided this is probably going to go not every third split rail, but occasionally I'm going to splatter it through the split rails. And then this is going to be used for the 4 corners of my diamond in a square blocks, which will be my cornerstones, which I am going to fussy cut my little baby Yodas out of. So that's how that's going to work out. I wasn't sure, in just a few minutes of thinking about it, now I'm pretty sure. So when I came up with my numbers, 32 by 40, 32 and 40 are divisible evenly by 4. So that told me right then and there I wanted to use a 4-inch segment piece. Now this is a 4-inch diamond in a square segment piece that I just keep in my kind of my leftover box. Remember, sometimes you're going to make little segments to just try out the process, or you're going to try out some fabric that you're thinking about. That's what I did here. I tried out some fabric for another project, ended up not wanting to use it, but I still had this perfectly good segment. So this is great to keep on hand to help me when I'm trying to decide what segment blocks I can use, because now I can move it around. I can double check my measurements on, let's move this down a little bit. I can double check my measurements across my height and my width. So I like having that available. And then this stays in the box, and someday it might just go in a really scrappy quilt, or I might just always keep it as something to help me when I'm in my planning session for any kind of a quilt, not just a panel quilt, but any kind of quilt at all. So with the 4-inch segments, my split rail is going to be all the way up both sides and all the way across the top and the bottom. And then because the height here is going to be 10 and 10, and just to fit on these sides, this top will be 8, but I'm still going to have that room out here. That's where the corner squares are going to come, right out here. And so this corner square will end up, let's bring this a little closer, you can see, is going to end up sitting right here. And then I'll have my split rail coming this way and my split rail coming this way on all 4 sides. So then that leads me to do the tiniest bit of basic math. I mean, the tiniest bit. So it leads me to this. Can you see it? Let me hold it up there. So I ended up at 32 by 40. So I'm using 4-inch segments. I need 8 across the top of my split rails, 8 across the bottom. 10 on the left side and the right side, and 4 corner squares, because 32 divided by 4 is 8. That gives me my top and bottom. And 40 divided by 4 is 10. That gives me my sides. And then I have those 4 corner spaces. That's my corner squares. So that's how easy it is, or cornerstones, you might call them, in your quilts. So that's how easy it is to figure out how many you're going to need. It's that very, very, very basic math, just adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing, and that's all. So let's review real quick again how we go about doing all of this. So you've done your original prep on your panel. Then you're going to see, is the panel as it is divisible by any number evenly? And remember, you have 2, 3, 4, and 5-inch segments to choose from. So do any of those. Now, I might be able to use a 2 or 3-inch segment. Excuse me, I'm going to sneeze here in a minute. Oh, excuse me. I know I'm so sorry. Oh, excuse me. I'm so sorry. I've been sneezing all day. Our trees are in bloom, are in bud. Can you believe it? It's not even the middle of March and our trees are in bud, which means the pollen counts are already going up. I've been sneezing like crazy. Anyway, I thought I had at least until the first part of May before that would start happening. Okay, so you could do 2 or 3 maybe. And when you do that division part to find out how many you need for the tops and the bottoms and the sides, it might end up being like a whole bunch. You could end up needing like maybe 20 across the top and the bottom and 30 up your sides. Well, that's a lot of segments to do for a border. However, if you want a tiny fine border and a border that's narrower, that's what you would use. But I like using borders, especially since this already has kind of this small border here. I want my next border to be a 4-inch border. I love 4-inch borders on quilts because you really get to see the fabric. And so the 4-inch works perfectly for me, but you'll make that decision for yourself and your project. Then once you do that, you might find that you have to trim down your panel a little bit more like I needed to. Perfectly okay. You'll go ahead and do that. And once you've done that, then you can take those new numbers and start calculating what you need by dividing that number. So you're going to divide your width by your segment size. So in this case, 32 divided by 4. And then you're going to take your height, 40 here, divided by the segment size. I'm going to hold that up a little bit more. Your 40 divided your height divided by your segment size. And that gives you the amount you need for your sides. And then you can decide for those 4 corners that are going to be empty space, do you just want to add more of your regular border? Do you want to add cornerstones? What do you want to do there? And then you would add in your 4 more. So very simple to do that. And next week, we are going to actually start looking at the segments. I'm going to put a few samples of the segments together so we can kind of look and see how we would go about choosing how we want this this split rail side border to look. And I'm going to do up a sample of the cornerstone with the little baby Yoda in it. If it ends up looking really bad, I can still change that and use some of my other fabric. So get ready this week by doing any additional measuring on the panel you've chosen. Do your minor calculations, and then get ready and choose which segment pieces you're going to be using. And then next week, get ready because we're going to actually start creating our segment pieces and creating our borders. All right, everybody, until next time, of course, sew life beautiful.